We have a pretty big exposure actually to Japan, which I think is kind of a sleeping giant, if you will, as it relates to climate. So they have a net zero by 2050 target, and they're very focused on a variety of different things, including train electrification. So that is something that we're invested as an example. I think the benefit of investing in public markets is that you can rotate into a variety of different themes that you're interested in and kind of underweight other themes. So just in general, we've actually been pretty underweight in residential solar, just particularly in the United States. There's just been a ton of debt on the balance sheets of a lot of these companies. I agree with you that over the long term, it's an amazing investment, but we've been pretty underweight there just because valuations were stretched after the IRA. And so now we're actually dipping our toe into it, and you see a lot of oversupply in the panels out of China. So what we're more focused on right now is grid infrastructure. We talked a little bit about that. Battery storage, 100%. I feel like there's a lot of hype in hydrogen, and I would argue that it's not necessarily economically viable right now. And so there's obviously green, blue, and gray hydrogen, and to focus on the green and the applicability there, it's going to be tough to really scale that in a meaningful way without subsidies, even though the United States is pretty focused on that. So we invest more in the electrolyzers or the picks and shovels. So what's kind of underlying that? If you think about, even with EV or fleet EV, we invest in some of the car parts, if you will. So we're not necessarily always making a play on, okay, we think Tesla's going to do really well and some of these other companies are not. So it's more kind of what's the underbelly that's going to allow each one of these components to get there. We're actually pretty underweight relative to our benchmark, which is the MSCI All Country World to the United States. And we have a pretty big exposure actually to Japan, which I think is kind of a sleeping giant, if you will, as it relates to climate. So they have a net zero by 2050 target, and they're very focused on a variety of different things, including train electrification. So that is something that we're invested as an example. And also they're doing a ton of building retrofittings. And so one of our companies is kind of focused on scaling that within Japan. I think it's important to think about what's a tailwind in each one of these countries. How is policy helping or hurting this cause so that we can actually be implementing these things? So obviously Europe is very focused on different, mechanisms and triggers than the United States, and same with Japan. And I mean, I don't know if you've talked about China at all in any of your podcasts, but they're actually the largest contributor to renewable energy globally. If you add up every other investor by country together, China meets that. But they also are investing in coal. Right.
Yes,
So
they're
they're just investing whenever they can invest in so that they can meet the energy demand, but they also are investing in renewables. So it's sort of a.
And often I always say China gets a bad rap. And, especially sometimes when you talk to people, they get frustrated, say, oh, I don't know how I can make an impact, or it's China's problem. And I always argue, where do you think everything comes from? Go look in your house. That thing you bought, where did it come from?
Well, right.
So we're all in this together, unfortunately, in the world. And there's a really good visual I like that I think NASA does a poor job of marketing themselves. So if you go to their website, you can actually see like CO2 over the course of a year. Like it shows you seasonality. They explain this. There's a really interesting scientist that used to show that. And you just see that we're all in this together. Like you just see this it's like we're one big marble. Right. And it's all, the air flows wherever air wants to flow, and trash moves around wherever it wants to move. Like it's not, and again, globalization happened long ago. So, I think the challenge, kind of like you're saying, is different countries are on different paces to do things. I think Europe is really way ahead of where the U.S. is. Like it just seems like you've got government and business and consumers all aligned, and they're just moving. Like Norway, Sweden, like they're going. And it feels like in the U.S., maybe it's kind of like you said, maybe it's who depends on who's in office, right? I feel like here the government is a little bit more not as aggressive, and also I think consumers is again part of the reason I even spend time on a podcast is I just think it is a complex problem, but most people kind of scratch their head and go, okay, what can I really do? I don't get it.
Yes.